Hello, welcome back. Got more content to share with you guys. I think it'll be fun. I'm trying to do more. My wife encourages me to do lots more, but it takes me a while to organize my content. I don't know how other people on social media platforms come up with so much content unless they're just rehashing other content that's out there. But this is something new. This is something that I've learned recently, and everything I try to share are things that I've learned for myself. If I get information from somebody else, I'm going to tell you guys, but I'm also going to share how I learned the same thing. I don't take anybody's word as it stands. I always search for examples in the scriptures. I always look for as much evidence as I can find to make a point. And as one of the mentors that I follow says, if you can't show it, don't say it. So I'm going to attempt to show you one neat thing that I found this year studying in the New Testament, not exactly following Come Follow Me, the program, but nonetheless something I think that's super noteworthy and has helped me see the life of Jesus in a different way. So one thing that I've been doing this year in studying the New Testament is looking for things that the Gospels show or tell about Jesus's life, or things that he said about himself in the Gospels that tie him to the Old Testament and the Old Testament prophecies, the prophets, and the law of Moses. So that brings us to where we're at. So I'm in Matthew 12 in verse 38 through 41. And it says, "Then certain of the scribes and of the Pharisees answered, saying, 'Master, we would see a sign from thee.' But he answered and said unto them, 'An evil and adulterous generation seeketh after a sign, and there shall no sign be given to it, but the sign of the prophet Jonas. For as Jonas was 3 days and 3 nights in the whale's belly, so shall the Son of Man be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. And the men of Nineveh shall rise in judgment with this generation, and shall condemn it, because they repented at the preaching of Jonas, and behold, a greater than Jonas is here.'" So I've read this lots of times, and as it says, you can go back to the story of Jonah, and you can clearly see different references to Christ in that story. But there are other stories that use this same sign of 3 days in the Old Testament. For example, the story about Joseph when he's in Egypt, and the butler's dream and the baker's dream. In both of those dreams, one of the signs is that 3 days both of them will come out of prison, and then Pharaoh will give them different judgments. So one of the questions I kind of asked myself was, why did Jesus use Jonas compared to the story of the butler and the baker? That was one of the questions I had about this. And so I did decide to go investigate the story of Jonas. So we're going to go there. So I'm going to go to Jonah chapter 1, and a lot of you guys know this story really well. I'm going to point out some of the things that I saw that reminded me of Christ, and then when we get to chapter 3, I'll talk about why I think Christ chose this example and what it should have meant to the Jews. Okay, so the Lord comes to Jonah, and he says, "Arise, go to Nineveh, that great city, and cry against it." So there's the mission call. You guys know the story. Instead, he goes, gets on a ship, and he starts sailing pretty much the opposite direction. Because if you look on a map, Nineveh is kind of north and east of Judea, and the only open water really is to the east, like straight east. Okay, and then they're out there and a storm comes up, and it says, the mariners were afraid and cried every man to his God, and cast forth the wares that were in the ship into the sea to lighten it of them. But Jonah was gone down into the sides of the ship, and he lay and was fast asleep. So right here, this immediately brings to mind the story of the disciples when they're with Jesus on the ship and a storm comes up and Jesus is in the back of the boat sleeping. So the shipmaster came to him and said unto him, What meanest thou, O sleeper? Arise, call upon thy God, if so be that God will think upon us that we perish not. And so they're all, the way I kind of see it, they're all kind of gathered together, including Jonah. And it says in verse 7, they said everyone to his fellow, Come and let us cast lots, that we may know for whose cause this evil is upon us. So they cast lots, and the lot fell upon Jonah. Which makes me think, I would love to have a bag of these lots, because they seem to be pretty accurate through the scriptures. Then said they unto him, Tell us, we pray thee, for whose cause this evil is upon us? What is thine occupation, and whence comest thou? What is thy country, and of what people art thou? Okay, and here's Jonah's response, which I think is awesome. Jonah says to them, I am an Hebrew, and I fear the Lord, the God of heaven, which hath made the sea and the dry land. So, obviously he says this because they ask, what do you do, where are you from, and who are you from, right? And so he says, I'm a Hebrew, which interpreted, so I've heard a couple things. One thing the word Hebrew means is the root letters are used to mean to cross over or to pass through. In essence, Jonah told the sailors, I am of the people who pass through the Red Sea on dry ground. I do not fear the great waters. And then a translation I got from the Hebrew Bible says Ivri, or Hebrew, also means one from beyond. And that reminds me of when Christ is brought before Pilate and he says, are you a king? And he says, my kingdom is not of this world. Basically, I'm from beyond. So he kind of gets the same response out of Jesus there. All right, back to Jonah. Also about being a Hebrew, one Jewish commentator said that Jonah, or the people at that time or around the time of Jonah, would have known who the Hebrews were. They would have been familiar with his story. And so that when he said, I am a Hebrew and I fear the Lord, the God of heaven, which made the sea and the dry land, basically what that would have meant to the sailors is, my God is the one who brought us through the Red Sea. So I'm not afraid of the water because he made the water. And that's also why he was sleeping, because he didn't care. It didn't bother him that he was in the midst of the sea, or in the midst of a storm. Okay, the men were, this is verse 10, the men were exceedingly afraid and said unto him, why hast thou done this? For the men knew that he fled from the presence of the Lord because he told them. Then said they unto him, what shall we do unto thee, that the sea may be calm to us? For the sea wrought and was tempestuous. And he said unto them, take me up and cast me forth into the sea. so shall the sea be calm unto you. For I know that for my sake this great tempest is upon you. So I love this imagery here, and the verb there where he says, take me up, is the same verb, nasa, which is used in reference to Christ being taken up or lifted up on the cross. And so you get some imagery of Jesus here. The other thing here is that Jonah is telling them to use him to make intercession for them on their behalf, right? He says, cast me forth into the sea, which we'll read a little bit later is a metaphor for death. And so shall the sea be calm unto you. For I know that for my sake this great tempest is upon you. Okay. Down to 14. Wherefore they cried unto the Lord. Let me back up a little bit. Okay. This is interesting too. So in 13, these guys didn't want to throw Jonah over. Nevertheless, the men rowed hard to bring it to the land, but they could not. For the sea wrought and was tempestuous against them. Wherefore they cried unto the Lord, and said, we beseech thee, O Lord, we beseech thee, let us not perish for this man's life, and lay not upon us innocent blood, for thou, O Lord, hast done as it pleased thee. So here again, this sounds very similar to that idea of Christ intercessing on our behalf. And in this case with Jonah, they're saying, don't let his death, right, his innocent blood, be upon us, be our fault. Whereas in the case of Jesus, when he's tried, the priests say, let his blood be upon us. Basically, we're willing to take it. And we do that as well, right? In asking for forgiveness and repenting, we're asking for Christ's blood to be upon us and atone for our sins. So they took up Jonah, this is verse 15, and cast him forth into the sea, and the sea ceased from her raging. Then the men feared the Lord exceedingly, and offered a sacrifice unto the Lord, and made vows. I like this part because it shows, just this whole chapter is interesting because the sailors kind of, they're obviously part of the story, but it's like it's added. What if Jonah wouldn't have got on the ship? These men wouldn't have come to know the Lord. And they made vows or covenants with the Lord. So God can turn a good thing out of a bad thing. All right, the last verse. Now the Lord had prepared a great fish to swallow up Jonah, and Jonah was in the belly of the fish 3 days and 3 nights. All right, let's go to chapter 2. So this is Jonah's prayer. I have a chapter heading here that says, Jonah prays to the Lord, and the fish vomits him out on dry ground. Yummy. Okay, so the most interesting thing out of this chapter for me, and for the context, or the reason that I'm sharing this with you guys, is the way Jonah refers to the fish in verse 2. It says, and said, I cried by reason of mine affliction unto the Lord, and he heard me. Out of the belly of hell cried I, and thou heardest my voice. So Jonah is calling the fish hell. Hell in, I have a mixed up note here. Hell in Hebrew is, let me go to my Hebrew Bible really fast. And if you guys have never used the Hebrew Bible, there's a really great one that's been out for about 10 years online. It's called Sepharia, Sefaria. So I'm going to go there. I'm going to go down to Jonah. Go to chapter 2. Okay, from the Jonah prays. Okay, so this gives us the Hebrew transliteration of the word. It says, from the belly of Sheol I cried out. So if I go up there and find the word Sheol, there it is. And I know enough Hebrew that I can kind of sound words out if I already know the word. So I found it. Okay, so this is the definition the Hebrew Bible gives. Sheol, the underworld, also used for the grave, also a word used for hell. Sheol, the Old Testament designation for the abode of the dead. I like that one the most because it kind of encompasses all the different contexts that it's used. But just for your information, it also says a place of no return, without praise of God, wicked sent there for punishment, righteous not abandoned to it, of the place of exile, and of extreme degradation in sin. Alrighty, but we're gonna stick with the designation for the abode of the dead, whether they're good or evil. In fact, there's a story in Jacob where he refers to going to Sheol or to hell after he dies to be with Joseph. Does that mean Joseph was a bad guy in hell? No, that's just a broad term meaning the abode of the dead. Okay, so we're going to use that. That's really important. So obviously, as Jesus pointed out in Matthew, the 3 days, right? The sign of 3 days and 3 nights in the whale's belly. He says 3 days and 3 nights he'll be in the heart of the earth. So it's a perfect correlation because here Jonah's drawing the fish as an image of hell. And Christ is using that exact thing to say, look, I'm going to be dead for 3 days. All right. So most of us can make that connection, especially with the help of Matthew. Super helpful. But there's one other thing, because Jonah's only halfway over. This is only chapter 2. If we go to chapter 3, there's more. Okay? Especially when it comes to the usage of that symbol of 3 days. Okay, so we'll start in verse 1 of Jonah chapter 3. And the word of the Lord came unto Jonah the second time after the whale spits him up, saying, Arise, go to Nineveh, that great city, and preach unto it the preaching that I bid thee. So Jonah arose and went unto Nineveh, according to the word of the Lord. Now Nineveh was an exceedingly great city of 3 days' journey. So there again, that phrase 3 days is here in the story, but this time it's in reference to Nineveh. So what does that mean about Nineveh? Well, Nineveh, if you look that up, and I had a hard time doing this because it's not in the Hebrew Bible doesn't give me anything. So I had to do like a Google search. And so if you search this is the most common thing, is you'll get this or something like this. This one's from the JewishEncyclopedia.com. Possibly Nineveh meant originally the seat of Ishtar, since Nina was one of the Babylonian names of that goddess. The ideogram means house or place of fish. Okay, so using that, if Nineveh means the place of fish, and in chapter 2, Jonah calls the fish Sheol or hell, or we could say this the spiritual world where the dead are, then Nineveh is the house or place of that spiritual world. So there's two evidences that Nineveh is also, just like the fish is a symbol for death and hell, Nineveh is also a type of that exact same idea. Okay, so what happens in Nineveh? Chapter 3. Okay, this is what happens. Let's see one more. Okay, so remember, it's 3 days' journey, and Jonah began to, this is verse 4, and Jonah began to enter into this city a day's journey, and he cried and said, Yet 40 days, and Nineveh shall be overthrown. Why 40 days? Well, 40, one of the symbolic meanings of the number 40 is it symbolizes a transformation that's taking place. So in the context of our story, Nineveh, or the place of hell, is about to experience a transformation. Verse 5, so the people of Nineveh believed God and proclaimed a fast and put on sackcloth from the greatest of them even to the least of them. For the word came unto the king of Nineveh, and he arose from his throne, and he laid his robe from him and covered him with sackcloth and sat in ashes. Okay. Now we're changing gears. We're not getting a narrative about Jonah anymore, and it changes, and now it's about the king. Who's the king of Nineveh, or who is the king of the house of the spirit world, or of the dead? Listen to what it says about him, and then we will connect it with some other scriptures. And he, the king, caused to be proclaimed and published through Nineveh by the decree of the king and his nobles, saying, Let neither man nor beast, herd nor flock taste anything, let them not feed nor drink water. Let them turn everyone from his evil way. I skipped down to verse 8. Let them turn everyone from his evil way and from the violence that is in their hands. Who can tell if God will turn and repent and turn away from his fierce anger that we perish not? Okay, this is the coolest part. So keep in mind that Nineveh is the spirit world, and there's the reference to the 3 days. Okay, so I'm going to duplicate my page here so I can open up another window. And we're going to go to the story of Mary when Mary visits the tomb. So I think that's John, is it 20? John 20. Okay, yep. All right. The first day of the week cometh Mary Magdalene early, when it was yet dark, unto the sepulchre, and seeth the stone taken away from the sepulchre. All right. And then Peter and John come, and then they leave. But Mary stood without, this is verse 11, but Mary stood without at the sepulchre weeping. As she wept, she stooped down and looked into the sepulchre, and seeth two angels in white sitting, the one at the head and the other at the feet, where the body of Jesus had lain. And they say unto her, Why weepest thou? And she said unto them, Because they have taken away my Lord, and I know not where they have laid him. And when she had thus said, she turned herself back and saw Jesus standing, and knew not that it was Jesus. Jesus saith unto her, Woman, why weepest thou? Whom seekest thou? She, supposing him to be the gardener, said unto him, Sir, if thou have been born him if thou have borne him hence, tell me where thou hast laid him, and I will take him away. Jesus said unto her, Mary. She turned herself and said unto him, Rabboni, which is to say, Master. So she recognizes him. And then Jesus says, touch me not, for I am not yet ascended to my Father. Now, wait a minute. Where has he been for 3 days? Well, just like he said about Jonah, he's been in hell. He hasn't been to his Father, as we can see here. He's been somewhere else. Well, what was he doing for 3 days? So that's a long time to be somewhere. Probably if you're dead, maybe it seems even longer. Who knows? All right. So here's the idea again. Jesus is in the spirit world for 3 days, but not with the Father. So where is he at? Who is he with? So now let's go to Peter, because Peter's going to answer this for us a little bit. He's not going to tell us everything. Let's see. Can't remember if it's 1st or 2nd Peter. Okay, 1 Peter chapter 3. Okay. And verse, you can start pretty early on, but the main points here are in 18, 19, and 20. For Christ also hath once suffered for sins, the just for the unjust, that he might bring us to God, being put to death in the flesh, but quickened by the Spirit, by which also he went and preached unto the spirits in prison. So that's what he was doing down there for those 3 days, which sometimes were disobedient, when once the long suffering of God awaited in the days of Noah, while the ark was a preparing, wherein few, that is 8 souls, were saved by water. Okay, but the point is that Christ preached to the spirits that were in prison. And that is, so that's also used in Luke, and it has to do with hell or the spirit world, okay? All right, now, going back to Jonah, I'm proposing that the king of Nineveh in the story of Jonah is also a representation of Jesus when he's in the spirit world. Nineveh is a type of the spirit world. Nineveh is 3 days, so that's another witness, I guess, of this point I'm trying to make. And if Jesus is the king, this is what he does, okay? Jonah 3, verse 6. For the word came unto the king of Nineveh, and he arose from his throne, oh, wrong one. Okay, verse 7. That's the one I want. This is how he preaches to the spirits. He caused it to be proclaimed and published through Nineveh by the decree of the king and his nobles. The king and his nobles. If the king is Jesus, who are the nobles? Any ideas? For me, this sounds like in our allegory or in our symbolic story, if Jesus is the king, the nobles would be those more faithful, more loyal of his subjects, who he can give instruction to, and then they can give instruction to people under them. So people like the prophets. So again, back to the case of Jesus. When he goes to the spirit world for 3 days, who does he go to? Does he go to everyone? Yes? No? Probably not, because Jesus never does anything by himself, except for in the case of the atonement. But in any other case, he delegates, right? He gives responsibility to his apostles in his earthly ministry. In the spirit world, it makes sense that he would have given the responsibility of helping him spread the message to his prophets. from, eons back. He would have had some really cool guys there to say, hey, let's get this thing going, and preaching to the spirits in prison, in hell. All right, so this, why is this important? Well, for a couple reasons. If we go back to Matthew, and kind of what I mentioned before, what I've been trying to do this year with my New Testament study is finding evidence of Christ, or using the New Testament to find evidence of Christ and his earthly ministry, his death, his resurrection in the Old Testament. So where else in the Old Testament can you find the ministry of Christ to the spirits of the dead, except for Jonah? I would love to hear your comments on that. If you have an example of an Old Testament type of Christ ministering to the spirits in hell, I want to hear about it. But there's one other reason this is important to me, and that is the name Jonah. Jonah in Hebrew means dove. So let me read Matthew again, and we'll use the idea of a dove and insert that into the text. Jesus says to the Pharisees, "An evil and adulterous generation seeketh after a sign, and there shall no sign be given to it but the sign of the prophet Jonas," or the sign of the dove, right? Because Jonah is the same as dove. So I asked myself, wait a minute, when was the sign of the dove given? And your brain should go back to the baptism of Jesus, okay? So the one I'm going to use is in Matthew 3. And I will read that for you. "Then cometh Jesus from Galilee to Jordan unto John to be baptized of him. But John forbade him, saying, I have need to be baptized of thee, and comest thou to me? And Jesus answering said unto him, Suffer it be so now, for thus it becometh us to fulfill all righteousness. Then he suffered him. And Jesus, when he was baptized, went up straightway out of the water, and lo, the heavens were opened unto him. And he saw the Spirit of God descending like a dove and lighting upon him." Okay. So if that's when the sign of the dove was given, and we go back to Matthew in this context, and Christ is saying to the Pharisees, there shall no sign be given to it but the sign of the dove, they've already missed it. But here's my other question to you, and you guys can answer this in the comments if you watch this. If the sign that was given to the Jews was the sign of the dove, who are the only people who would have seen that sign, and why? That's my question for you. My answer to that question is this: the people who would have seen the sign of the dove and recognized that as the divine sign of what he's saying here, they would have seen the dove and recognized, oh look, a Jonah. Oh wait, what's the story of Jonah? Oh yeah, he was in the belly for 3 days, and then he was in Nineveh preaching for 3 days. The people who would have been able to make that connection, most likely, in my mind, would have been the people who were already following John the Baptist. That's what it means to me. And that's why this is so important to me. because I believe that the same way Christ came the first time and sent John to prepare the people to receive him at his coming, I believe the same thing is going to happen when he comes again. That one like John will be called, and he will be sent to prepare people for his coming. And that whoever is already following that John will recognize the sign of the coming of the Son of Man when it is given. Anyway, hope you guys enjoyed that. Do share your comments. I'd love to hear what you guys think. So one is if you guys have any other examples, types or foreshadowings or prophecies about Christ preaching to the spirits in the dead that seem really clear to you, I'd love to hear those. So thanks, and I'll see you later.